Research Director at the Social Market Foundation, and I'm really pleased to be able to chair and convene this discussion on the cooperative and mutual sector. For those of you who don't know us, the Social Market Foundation is a cross-party think tank working across a wide range of policy issues, including economic policy and including kind of alternative corporate models and structures. And cooperative and mutuals happen to be one of the areas that we have looked at. We published a report last year looking at the kind of the barriers to growth of the mutual sector, which I would urge you all to look at. So to do a bit of housekeeping, I think by now, by this stage of conference, if you didn't already know, you should be pretty familiar with the panel format. So we'll have 5 minutes from each of the panelists. I'll ask a couple of questions and then open up to the audience. So in terms of housekeeping, you will have the camera in the corner that is streamed live to YouTube. So whatever you say in its wisdom or otherwise will be conserved for posterity online. So be aware of that. If you're on social media, our handle is @SMF Think Tank. Our partners are generous sponsors for this event, Nationwdie and Royal London. Their handles are @Nationwdie, @Royal London, and the hashtag is #LPC24. In terms of fire exits, just follow the green signs. Hopefully, should be self-explanatory. We're not expecting any drills. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into it. So I imagine there's a lot of people who are knowledgeable about the cooperative and mutual sector. You may well be aware that the Labour government, in its election manifesto, committed to doubling the size of the cooperative and mutual sector. So we thought it'd be a good opportunity to convene people who've been thinking a lot about the economics and politics of cooperatives and mutuals, to reflect on what that might look like and how we might achieve that target. And so that really is the subject of our discussion today. How do we double the size of the cooperative and mutual sector? So we've got a fantastic panel, and I'm going to start by taking a contribution from Kevin Parry, who is chairman of both Nationwdie and Royal London, both of our generous benefactors, and so therefore knows a thing or two about cooperatives and mutuals.
Thank you very much on this side. So apologies in advance if my comments do not contain wisdom, but I'll do my best. And thank you very much for battling across in the rain today, and didn't get I hope too wet with the buses going past and splashing you and the rest of it. So the exam question is: can Labour double the size of the mutual sector? And I think the short answer to that is yes, very much so. And the reason that I believe that is I think there is a genuine demand for the benefits that come out of mutuality. And the first issue, I think, is around, do we have total alignment between the needs of customers and members? And we do. So if you're in PLC world, and there's nothing wrong with PLC world, but they've also got another stakeholder in there, which is to give a return on capital to external financing. We're in the great position where everything we do is for our members who are our customers. And that applies, I think, just as much for co-ops or any other version of mutuals. So it is a real differentiator. And I think having that demand, that desire, means that we're actually pushing at something that should be achievable. And I think also in terms of what are the priorities that have been set out for this government that has, with all likelihood, got a long-term perspective they can put on this, likely to be more than one parliament. You can think short-term, medium-term, and long-term, something that has been lacking for much of the last decade. And we've heard about priorities around housing. Can we build 350,000 or so houses a year to get to that 1.5 million? I believe we can. Some years ago, I chaired housing for the government, then called HCA, now called Homes England. It is totally doable with only, in my view, 1 or 2 or 3 things need to be unblocked to make a big difference. I can see a role for mutuals in that, perhaps on land banks, that kind of thing, that can really make a difference in housing. I can think about pensions. Most people nowadays are in workplace pensions. They are going to be inadequate, but we've got 20 years to fix it for most people. So we need to start thinking of the issues that will give people a better pension than they would otherwise get. If we don't start changing it now, it won't accumulate in the right way by the time people hit retirement age. Royal London specialises in pensions, and we know that can be achieved. And more than that, because it's a mutual, you do better because we give what we call profit share. So we top up the pensions more than you would get in any other environment. Life care also probably needs to look at mortgages and how people are able to use that asset they've got, their house. So 2/3 of the population have a house. It's hard to get liquidity out of that. There are things that can be done that could care for you in later life. So we never know when we're going to get ill. We never know when we might need later life care. We never quite know when we're going to retire. It's getting harder all the time. So I think all of those things could be thought about. And I think mutuals have got a great part to play. So can it double? Yes. Has it made a very good start in this government? Yes, it has actually, because my company, Nationwdie, is buying Virgin Money in a week or two's time. And the Coventry Building Society is buying the co-op, which is temporarily not a co-op, but that is also doing a fair bit to double the size of the sector.
Co-op bank.
Co-op bank, indeed.
Unless there's something I don't know about.
Yeah. So it's think mechanism. So with that, I'll stop and let somebody else say a word.
Sorry, I'm recovering from the heart attack.
Brilliant, thanks, Kevin. I'm now going to turn to Shirine Khoury-Haq, who is Group Chief Executive of the Co-op.
Yep, thank you very much. Look, the Co-op Group, you'll know as a food retailer, wholesaler. We're also the leading funeral provider in the UK, and we also have a legal services and insurance business. We trace our roots back to 1844, where this organization was founded in Rochdale. And essentially it was founded in order to provide food access and equity to working class people who were being badly exploited at the time. It was a business that was sorely needed, and the cooperative structure was what enabled it to be as successful as it was, in that it was owned by the people who used it, and it was also governed by them as well. Now, I wanted to talk first of all about the size of cooperatives. So in the UK alone, there are 7,000 co-ops with annual revenues of around 43 billion and 15 million members. And they're across so many industries: retail like us, agriculture, energy, education, hospitality, sports, and I could go on. But that is also a global movement as well, that was based on those original Rochdale pioneers and the co-op that they created. So across the globe, hi Emily, there are 3 million co-op enterprises across the globe who have annual revenues of 2.4 trillion, and 1 in every 8 people in the world is a member of a cooperative. Now, it's wonderful that the Labour government has stated an intention to double the size of the co-op and mutual sector. And the question for us then is, what is it that we can be doing in order to be able to fulfill society's needs, which is, are in our DNA. ESG doesn't come as an afterthought to co-ops and mutuals. It is part of why we exist, and it's part of our purpose. So the question, as Kevin said, is where are those areas where we might be able to apply this business model to be able to address society's needs, and then as a result, work with this government who really understands the benefit of co-ops and mutuals to double the sector. Now, I wanted to give you some examples of things that are already being done. So within our organization, aside from all the things that we do in our communities, we've given £108 million into community enterprises and community funds since 2016. We run schools, for example. So we have 38 co-op academies that serve 20,000 students. We specifically target geographies that are in need of good schools where there is socioeconomic deprivation. Almost all of our schools are now at good or outstanding levels. We provide free breakfasts to every single student who attends our schools. And we found that the cooperative model is really an excellent way of governing academy trusts, which don't always succeed. So that is one example of an area where we could really add some value. Another example is around community energy. So Mid-Counties Co-op, for example, they buy 25% of their energy from community energy production, but they're also rolling it out into communities. In the US, more than 12% of the population get energy from cooperative suppliers, and half of the landscape of the United States is powered by cooperative energy. So when the system is right, that you can really provide for society and do it in a way that is owned by its members. In Italy, social care cooperatives have, they provide 13% of social care. In Bologna, 85% of the city's care for elderly children and those with disabilities are provided through social care co-ops. Now, that provision is made possible through collaboration with government that provide different tax treatments, that provide fiscal and regulatory enablers to ensure that society's needs are met through that sector. So there are real advantages that this model can provide for society. And for me, it's really a great opportunity now that we have a government who really understands this to think about how we might make this mutually beneficial for society.
Mutually beneficial.
Yes.
I'm now going to invite our candidate of Southwark, cooperative peer and long-standing applicant and promoter of mutual cooperatives, to give some opening remarks.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the Social Market Foundation for all the work you do around conference. It's a really, really good program you put together. Thank you for what you do. Great to see colleagues. It's great to be part of this great panel as well. Previously. Starting with where Kevin did, the answer to the question is yes. We definitely can double the size of the cooperative sector. And of course, that's the easy answer is yes. Of course, how we deliver that, of course. I think from my position, of course, as a politician serving in Parliament in the House of Lords, I think the way I actually go about delivering that is I've got to be open, I think, to the sector. I've got to listen to the sector, what they want, absolutely clear. To want to engage with the sector properly, because what they actually, how we work together and stuff. To understand the needs of the sector. Kevin said there, the whole issue about we serve the members. We're not changing. We're not company. We're mutual members. We give dividends. We have a different philosophy for understanding how things work. So understanding that, so openness, engage with the understanding, and then work with the sector. Actually, if you want to double the size of the economy, what does the sector need to actually deliver that? Because as politicians, we can't deliver any of that. We can say we support it, but actually, it's going to be the businesses. They're going to actually grow the sector and achieve that. So our job, I think, as a politician, is to actually deliver the change needed in Parliament, through Parliament, to actually deliver that pledge. That's what we've got to do. That's the main thing we're doing there. We only understand that we're actually talking to the cooperative movement in all its different facets. Understand that, that's the way it's got to work there. That way, then we can define the objectives, we can work out the solutions, and as colleagues have said, there are so many different issues we've got to deal with, in the UK today, where the cooperative model can be part of the solution. Education, social care, financial services, all these things, we can have a cooperative model there. We've got to understand the sector, and then as politicians listen, work with, and then deliver those changes you need. That's my thinking. That's my job as a politician. And of course, on top of that, of course, I'm the government chief whip in the House of Lords, and chief whips don't do a lot of talking normally. We do a bit more talking in the Lords and the Commons. My job is actually deliver legislation through the Lords. So, and that's going to get there. If I want to work with the sector, I was very happy, of course, as Kevin knows, we got the Building Societies Act, Amendment Act 2024 through. The last bit of legislation actually got through before the Parliament it was dissolved. And at that point, I was the opposition chief whip then. And when you get to the end of the Parliament, you have this thing called the wash-up, where you sort of sit and you go, what isn't going to go through? I went into the government chief's office and said, when nothing gets through, I said, "Let's my bill gets through." I said it half jokingly, but they came at me and they said, "Your bill's going to go through, Lord Kennedy." But of course, it was important, and that was one small thing. And that was an important thing there, because what that did was, that was a bill everybody supported. The Treasury got it wrong. We needed primary and second legislation, and it was really important to get those smaller members through, and that really helped the alongside the sector. Because it was a game there where we understood the problem, found a solution, we're able to get it through Parliament. So I think the politicians responding to the needs of the various sectors and then delivering what they need to a great economy. Doing that together, we can more than double the sector, the size of the sector, I think, in the next few years.
Fantastic, thank you. And finally, I'm going to bring in Emily Darlington, who is Labour and Co-operative MP for Milton Keynes Central. There's a background in a lot of the sectors we're talking about: energy, care, and housing.
Thank you very much. Apologies for being late and showing up soaking wet. There's steam rising off of me. It's just me drying off. We often have these discussions and we start as if this is something brand new. But the reality is the cooperative and mutual sector is an old solution to problems that continue to remain here today. And the reason it's lasted this long and has gone global is because it actually works. And it works not only from an economic point of view and a social point of view, but from a public acceptance point of view. There are certain parts of our economy where people feel really, really uncomfortable with a pure profit motive. Look at what's happened with water, right? It's not just that the investment hasn't gone into water. The anger is stoked by the fact that the profit model that was brought into water when it was privatized was made the sting even worse, the fact that we can't swim in our rivers. There is a universality to water. I know you're from the States. I always find it,
The accent is, but anyway, long story.
right. And I'm not from Canada either, so, you know. But it always surprises me. You go to the States, most free marketplace, and who runs the city's water? The city. Who runs the city's electricity? Often owned by the city or by a cooperative. So for me, it's about when we look at where we are today, we know there's not a lot of money, but we know that cooperatives and mutuals are part of that economic growth and that social growth and achieving that decade of national renewal that the nation voted for. And we look at each and every one of those missions, and there are opportunities where already the cooperative movement and the mutual movement has proven itself. So early years, absolutely. Why, you know, we have a crisis right now in nursery places, but also in quality of what the service is. We know from our history with Sure Start the importance of those years. That is absolutely a role that we already know there are some cooperative models that need to be almost, given an absolute boost. Biodiversity management is the one I always talk about. Some people call it landscaping. I call it biodiversity management. The best way to do it is to get as close as possible to the people. And therefore, in Milton Keynes, we are on a 5-year, so we're not 4 years into a 5-year. No, we're 1 year into a 5-year plan of going completely cooperative parish councils and the council, and it will be a biodiversity management system. And this is about getting better quality, closer to home, and actually building that knowledge around biodiversity. Energy, 100%. I make this argument all the time. Why do we spend so much time talking about grid capacity when what we should be talking about is cooperative community models of energy generation that don't need the grid and therefore don't need to wait the 8 years for a new plug into the grid. Buses. The reality is councils aren't going to be able to afford to run their own buses, right? There's no way you can start from scratch and there's going to be a bunch of money. But the public are fed up of the private sector running buses. And there is something really exciting to be had there around cooperatives, working with the councils in terms of the social and economic routes that are needed to make sure that we achieve the aims of our city, our town, our rural area. Co-ops, it's just ripe for a co-op. And housing. Again, the way part of what the NPPF framework needs to be is getting rid of some of those barriers in terms of cooperative housing models. It has to be part of the solution, and it's a part that we don't talk about a lot. We talk about social, we talk about registered providers, we talk about private, talk about shared ownership. Where is the cooperative model of ownership? And I would even say our problems with leasehold have a solution in cooperatives. So what's Roy and I's job? Roy and I's job is to make sure that every barrier that you identify in this room, we're able to work to remove. What's your job? To figure out where the excitement is in your area, the country or nationally, and what you think you can start and create to actually lead us to where we need to be in rebuilding this country.
Brilliant. Thank you. So, I mean, we heard about better returns, we heard about better service, we heard about kind of ethics and ESG, more involvement of members. It almost sounds too good to be true. And there's a bit of me that probably spent too much time studying economics at an impressionable age that says, if there's a free lunch here, why hasn't it been taken yet? So why are we in the situation where the government feels it has to, there's scope to double the size of the cooperative sector, the cooperative mutual sector? Why hasn't it happened yet?
So should I take that first? So I think the point I'd pick up actually, that I totally agree in terms of what's the role of the politicians and what's the role of the sector itself here. So here you've got some of the biggest mutuals represented, and we're setting something called the Mutual and Co-op Business Council. We think our job is to take these ideas, work them through, and then take them to government. And then, to your point, are there obstacles in place that stop some of this happening? The Building Society Act that Nationwdie did a lot of the drafting for on behalf of the whole sector. It was then in the Conservative government. There was a bit of a hitch at the last moment, and it was saved in the Lords. That was an excellent view of unblocking and levelling up the playing fields between building societies and banks. And I think that is an excellent example of where it didn't cost any money for government. It just took enablement of a slightly different bit of legislation, and that got through. So I think, to your point, we have got a situation where there are blocks, we have to come to you, and we need the Commons and the Lords for this to get things through. But I don't think we're starting by saying we're asking for money, because co-ops and mutuals make money too, but we reinvest it back into the business. So instead of paying it out to those who provide the finance, they are for profit, they're not charities, but the investment goes back in. So in my business of banking insurance, a huge amount goes into technology. A huge amount, in the case of Nationwdie, goes in keeping our branches open. These are all services that are provided, but if we didn't make profit, we couldn't do that. So I think we mustn't confuse them with charity, but because we're substantial and we're successful, and hopefully we can run ourselves incredibly well, because I don't see why we shouldn't be at least as best. Nationwdie is #1 for service in this country in the business of banking. Why can't we take it further? So I think this is a great partnership of enablement with ideas coming, and other and the biggest have probably got the most to contribute because we've got the most resources, but everybody's got a part to play. A different event yesterday, we touched on credit unions, tend to be very small, but got an important part to play as well in social mobility, for example.
Can I also, you're absolutely right, and I should be clear, when I was talking about water companies and the for-profit model, absolutely, I recognise that you guys also have a for-profit model, but it is a different one, and it's perceived by the public differently as well, as it should be. There are a couple of examples of where, quite frankly, I think cooperatives and mutuals are kept out through usually through a perceived risk, or a perceived complication, or a perceived, for some reason, people think it's more risky. No idea why, because there's no evidence to that whatsoever. But there has traditionally been a view in government or in councils that the cooperative or mutual model is more risky. Again, do not understand that. Also, why do you have to do more paperwork? I mean, no, but it seems to me, if we want to encourage the doubling of the sector, why do we put a higher paperwork burden on cooperatives and mutuals than we do on a company registered, a limited, whatever you call it? I mean, so for me, there's some really simple things here. And again, that leads to the perception that you're more risky.
Yeah,
And
and it came up actually at a different Finge event yesterday, and I think, particularly for the co-ops, there seems to be a lot of bureaucracy around. I don't think any of this is done with intent by governments over the decades. It's just that when legislation gets renewed and updated, they think of PLCs, then they forget about the mutual sector. They often forget about charity, as well as the co-ops, and so or companies limited by guarantee. All the different structures we've got. I don't hugely enjoy talking about the different constitutions because everybody then starts wondering, what type of thing they should be. The key is that we should have level playing fields, and I think it's our job to remind ministers and civil servants that when they're updating corporate legislation in any way, don't forget the other corporate vehicles. Not everybody is a limited company.
Yeah, 100% agree. And so, I think that's been part of the barrier, is not a reality of risk, but a perceived risk, a perceived that it's more complicated, and a perceived that it's going to take longer and it's more difficult. And the reality is, we as government need to be standing up and saying, no, actually it's not, and we need to create that level playing field for you.
Could I add just one point? I think part of the issue also is a lack of public understanding around what the cooperative and mutual model is.
Yeah.
And if you look at our recent ad campaign, Owned by You, Right by You, that's what we really tried to focus on, explaining what that model is. Very simply, that it's owned by its members. It is for the benefit of its members, who then participate in the governance of it and then economically transact with it. So for me, it's partially lack of understanding, and also perhaps in the last government, a lack of understanding or appreciation for the benefit that the model could bring. And that's the opportunity for us now. But I do think that we do have an opportunity here to define what the sector can do and what it needs in order to do it. And we haven't sufficiently spoken with one voice, with very clear examples on what it can do. And that, again, is the opportunity through the council, bringing the rest of the co-ops and mutuals and the trade associations with us, so that we speak in that one voice.
Good. On that very point, I mean, I've only been in the government cheaper now, for 8-9 weeks, and very quickly I worked out is the pressure on time to get the legislation through. It's a huge problem. We've got a very ambitious, sort of King's speech, 40 bills. It's really challenging to get all that stuff through. If you don't speak on voice, then you risk missing out, because you won't get in there. And it's a real problem. So if you can actually have one voice, say we need this, we need that, we need this, then you can actually get yourself in. But if you can't get that point, you can't even get onto the first base. Yeah. Then you miss this, you miss that. I just saw my old friend Robert Kelly about that, from the credit union sector. Now, the credit unions work on the 1979 Act largely, don't they, Robert? I mean, I'm sure it's a great act. It's over 40 odd years old. I'm sure it could do with a bit of updating,
Voice changed last year.
Yeah, I know, that's what I know, but those sort of things, really need looking at. So how we can make these things better and stuff, all this stuff needs to look at. But getting stuff through, as it were, is really, really important.
And sorry, if I could add one, if I could just repeat an earlier point.
Yeah.
It's one thing to go to a busy politician and talk about all the things you need. It's kind of boring, actually, because that's what they hear all day long. I think the real conversation is, this is what we can do for you. This is what we can do to deliver the manifesto. This is what we can do for society. And we need this and this and this. And perhaps, again, that is the message that we have collectively failed to bring to government, which we have the opportunity to do now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder if I can pick up on Shirine's point about knowledge and public knowledge and understanding. To what extent is it for the sector to be promoting itself? And to what extent is it necessary or appropriate, particularly for a government that has this commitment to grow the sector, to be doing some of that educative work or trying to explain why this is a priority of all the other things that the government could be doing, why it wants to commit to growing?
My view is that you don't want the government promoting you, because nobody likes the government, quite frankly. So nobody likes any government. So the government, when the government tells you to stop smoking, it's not as powerful as when actually people who smoke, ex-smokers tell you to stop smoking. I think it's up to you guys to promote the sector and promote what you can do. And it's up, as I said, it's up to us to get out of your way and make sure you've got a clear path there. But I think it's a kiss of death for any industry for government to say, oh, this is fantastic. Everybody goes, there must be something wrong with it then.
I think just building on this, on the theme, I totally agree with that. I think where we need help is coordination between departments of government sometimes. And Lord Kennedy very kindly, I think, offered to help us coordinate between different departments, because that can run into obstacles for traditional reasons. And I think, we've got the obvious departments who are very much behind what we're doing, but it will touch on a lot of other departments, and coordination is important. But it comes with time, obviously, but it doesn't need money again. It just needs that odd ointment, I suppose, to get it moving.
I wonder if I could prompt you to think about international comparisons. Shirine, you came up with a few. Emily, you mentioned a few as well. So Australia seems to come up quite often. You mentioned Italy and certain parts of the US. Who's done this well? What countries might be models for us to learn from? What are the lessons from international comparators?
There's actually people in the audience who
Yeah.
can answer that question better when I'm looking at them.
Good opportunity to bring people in. So very happy to take questions, pivoting off of the issues I raised.
The experts in the front row.
The best in the world, Finland. Next best, there's a whole bunch of countries that have got really good legislative environments and big cooperative sectors as a result. In France, 60% of banking is in mutual sector because they don't facilitate demutualization. And it's not really that complicated. If you get the architecture right, the sector will grow and the sector will fill the gaps. But you have to remove those barriers.
Great, thank you. Who's up with that?
Yeah, James from Cooperatives UK. We've just come from a separate fringe on the same subject, actually, where we heard from both Shirine in Treasury and Gareth Thomas in Department for Business and Trade. That really did seem to be on the same page on some of the key questions, which is really encouraging. They both recognised that a key priority for the cooperative mutual sector is unlocking options for these businesses to raise more capital for themselves. And they were both honing in quite a lot on this Law Commission review of cooperative law that's currently ongoing. So what can we do as a sector, as parliamentarians, as other influences, to ensure that that Law Commission review produces really bold, enabling recommendations on things like capital raising?
I might take another couple of questions if it seems right. You are? Yourself there?
Thanks, Sam, the Finance Commissioner. Sorry, Karen, you might have heard a variation on this question yesterday. It talks about international comparisons. In the States, they've had the Community Reinvestment Act for over 40 years, which has just been kind of reinvigorated, and that led to a huge increase in the CDFI sector, which over there incorporates credit unions. Therefore, a huge increase in the scale of credit for individuals and SMEs. So really, meets expanding a carbon neutrals agenda plus an economic growth and resilience education agenda. So we can all agree it's about time maybe that we had a similar piece of legislation here.
And the lady in the bar there.
Hi, Emily from Social Enterprise UK. Just responding to Shirine's point, and to let everybody know that we put out a document today setting out how cooperatives, mutuals and other forms of diverse business can help support Labour's 5 missions as part of the Future Economy Alliance, which Cooperatives UK and Social Enterprise UK and about 30 organisations are part of. There's a link to it here if anyone's interested to read a bit more, but we think it's an important part of raising awareness and understanding about the value that's there.
Great. So the couple of questions we had was how to feed into the Law Commission review, and does the UK need a Community Reinvestment Act or equivalent?
So we've got a bit of experience, I mentioned, on the Building Society Act, where I think it's quite important people don't just say this is what we want, but actually help government by drafting what we want, because it is really difficult, I think, to change it from a review into something that might be suitable for a bill and then ultimately an act. So I think we've got to use our skill set. It means that we incur some costs for doing it, but it helps the sector. And I would definitely say do that. I would say don't overcomplicate. A simple bill is going to be easier to get through than a long and complicated bill. And so I think really, if you like, pick the battles. But I think we can absolutely draw on good practice elsewhere. There are some interesting financing models down in Australia that we could look to, and we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I think research that can be done, Micho does it, but whoever you decide to want to use, let's look at what exists and not overcomplicate changes. There is a huge industry in this country of, we'll just do it a little bit better, but then it takes a year or two instead of getting it done in a short period of time. So I would say be really practical about it and help the parliamentarians. And don't forget, they're not day in, day out thinking about legislation around mutuals. They've got all their constituency business they have to work with, and therefore help them.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Getting stuff professionally drafted, yes, it is a cost, but actually it's a huge time saver, because if you've got to go to the House authorities to get something drafted and go back and forth and you're not the subject expert, it's a mess, and then you've missed a chance. Big thing though is get consensus. There's nothing worse than being lobbied by one bit of the sector in any sector that says this is what we need, and then you get the next person coming along, no, don't do that, it will destroy everything, and then you just kind of think, oh, well, I'm just going to put that on the too hard pile, I'm afraid. But also publicly make the campaign, make our jobs easier, and publicly campaign to say this is what we need, and isn't it great that this amendment's gone down, and this is what it's going to do, because that makes our jobs much, much easier. Otherwise we're the ones making the case, we're the ones without the time or the resources really, and we suffer enough abuse as it is. So especially if we're going to get abuse from another bit of the same sector, it really kind of takes the wind out of us thinking, oh yeah, well, or confidence. I just wanted to pick up on the other point about whether we needed some kind of, so I'm a former Treasury Special Advisor, so I would never want to spend money that isn't there. But the short answer is somehow we need to figure out how we make some of this work in the UK. And having seen some of the transformation, looking at Detroit and looking at, really helping some of these cities that were absolutely killed with manufacturing going down, it's not dissimilar to some of our cities. And so and it was one of my big challenges to the government when they were doing town deals. So, they were giving money to do these town deals, to revitalize these towns, and a lot of them were ex-manufacturing towns. And there was no capacity within that to use that money in that way. It was all a very traditional, you have a rolling stock, you do a rolling stock, rolling investment programs in terms of kind of rebuilding the high street, as opposed to, so what's going to go in those shops? And who's going to be the next business from the area that's going to create the jobs that have been lost by the closure of the mine. So there's something we're really missing there by not looking at that as part of potentially the kind of abilities, responsibilities, potentially funding that we give to mayors of combined authorities.
Any thoughts on the Law Commission review with the community aspect?
Look, I was delighted to see the Law Commission review, and Dom kindly went through some of the questions with me as well. So, it's a great detailed review that's coming at the right time. The question is, how long will it take to actually come out with some answers? My view, as I've discussed with Kevin, is I think that if we can, with the rest of our sector, come up with at least 1 or 2 short-term examples that we can use as case studies, we can get the ball rolling and then let the rest of this follow. And Rose, of course, our trade associations will need to understand and work with us on that. But in every aspect of business, my view is you've got to let people feel something when you're enacting a big change. They really need to see it working, and then that begets more change, and that starts a ball rolling. And then in terms of the legislative review, back to what Lord Kennedy said, we do need to be quite clear about what it is that's required to enable the sector. So, yes.
Just to echo that point, I think speaking with one voice is so important. You need to work out before you come to the politicians what you want. If you have 10 options, I mean, it'll never happen. So you need what do you need for mutual service? What do you need financial service? What do you need in retail? What do you need in housing? We need these things. Be really clear what you want, and then you enable the rest of us then to actually push that to happen. But if the sector is fighting itself and there's people, that's guaranteed to rest of us, we're getting absolutely nowhere. Because we don't understand what they want, they're all confused and stuff, and they will have all those problems there. And there's loads of things the sector, all the corporate sector can do massive, we do great things we can do. But we've got to speak in one voice, and also, never let perfection actually, be a problem. Perfection's the enemy of good. When we had the bill we did in the last session, my worry was, and I was going down Nationwdie to talk about the bill, my worry was some well-intentioned peer would turn up with some wonderful amendment that would actually be really great. We'd all want it, but it would guarantee the thing would be sunk because we had no time to go back to the Commons. So I was really, one thing about it, I said, I didn't put anything down. I actually identified it. We might put an amendment down. These are we're going to watch out for, Good people mean well, but they'll destroy it.
That's how you became chief whip.
Yeah. So in the end, they never did anything. 1 or 2 thought about it. I spoke to them. They looked and said, guarantee we'll get nothing. But they don't understand that. So it's really important, that perfection can be the enemy. Good is good enough in many cases. You've got to go for that.
More questions?
Hello, Andrew White from the Association of Financial Mutuals. Both Kevin and Shirine, you talked in their own way about the origin of our sector in innovation, doing different things, creating new products when the existing infrastructure wasn't serving the needs of people. It seems to me that if we are going to grow the sector in the way you're talking about, innovation's got to be at the heart of that. What are the barriers that stop us as the sector innovating? What are the barriers that stop us doing, just in my world, financial services, doing what the fintechs have done in terms of changing the paradigm? What's getting in the way?
Correct. More questions?
Jamie Jenkins, Royal London. Just on the point about communicating the nature of mutuals to customers, consumers, I think it's a really interesting one because we struggle with it, and like many others, in terms of trying to help people understand the difference. Because at a very basic level, you would think lots of consumers would flock to a mutual if they knew they were going to be sharing the profits and sharing the running of the company, if you like. And we often talk about, the fact that it's our business, and other mutuals talk about their business as customer owned, and and indeed we'll share some profits, whether it's Nationwdie or Royal London or another company. But it's to say, our business is different because it's owned by you, the customer. It's partly predicated on them knowing what the context is for all the other businesses. And even to say that it's different from a shareholder-owned business, which is not a good bad thing. But again, well, some people would say, well, I don't really understand the difference or what a shareholder business is, or, you know, people in general, quite rightly, don't spend a lot of time studying corporate structures. And so there is something about that. And yet, just final point, there is, I suppose the question is, how have other countries in some cases done this? Because it does seem like in Australia and 1 or 2 other places, there's an awareness that seems to prevail. And I'm intrigued by how you do more in the UK.
Question here.
Mark Gibson, Post Office. The demise of the high street, the demise of the villages, particularly in post offices with chemists and other vital sort of local facilities. How do you see the mutual model effectively, or can you see the mutual model being the answer to some of this demise? Can you see the mutual model working, particularly for a large organisation, for something like the post office? There's many examples internationally that I have, and I say post office, I don't mean the Royal Mail. I mean the branch networks, and how important they are to local communities, and community cohesion and access to cash, etc. But they need a model which is going to be sustainable and work for the future.
Fantastic. So we had, what are the barriers to innovation, like fintechs, in cooperative mutuals, how other countries boosted awareness, and what's the role of cooperative mutuals in revitalising high streets? Who has thoughts on that?
Let me take 2 of them. I think in particular, I won't take Jamie's, but I think in terms of what is stopping things, I'd say our own ambition, and looking for the necessary parts of society that are not being served. So one of the reasons that Nationwide is buying Virgin Money is that we know there is a huge unmet demand from small and medium-sized enterprises for high-quality banking services. It's an unloved part of the sector because it isn't deemed to be sufficiently profitable by a lot of the banks. So we think that is really important. A number of our customers, our members, have said, "Why can't I do my business banking with you? Because I'm an electrician or I'm a plumber or whatever it is," and it really frustrates me. So our ambition is to embrace that and bring it in. But I think it does start from having a top quality board, or whatever you call your governing body, that is thinking, what more could we do? So I think the only constraint is ambition. To the key point around high streets, I do share your view absolutely. The high street is an important part of the social fabric of this country, and keeping key businesses there is an important part of maintaining the society as a whole. It's clearly something really close to Nationwide's heart, and we are not the only one that is not closing branches, because we do think that they've got the part to play. And more than that, we're also not dumbing them down. So every Nationwide branch still has a bank manager. It means that when you've got something more complicated to do, you can go and talk to somebody who is knowledgeable. And we think that's very important. So yes, there's access to cash, of course, but and there's part of society that needs that. But actually, what we find, the greatest demand comes for difficult things. So I need to buy my first house. I don't know how to get my mortgage. I'm getting married. What does that mean? I've got children. What does that mean? Apart from lots more expense. And or I'm getting divorced, or mum or dad has died. That's when people need a personal touch. And we think it's really important part of the society. So we're very committed to that. And I think the post office is like-minded.
I could add, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna pick up first that last point. The other thing that face-to-face is so important with is financial abuse.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, your chatbot is not going to pick up financial abuse, and we know that the more we learn about financial abuse, the more we understand how endemic it is, and how it is one of the biggest barriers to women fleeing abusive households. So I think it's so important. The high street, I think some of what you're talking about. So what motivates people to go to a high street rather than just buying it on Amazon or doing it on a banking app or whatever? It's the experience, right? There has to be an added value. because why else would you go? Especially in this weather. You wouldn't, but that's the reality. So what is going on there? And that's some of the discussion that we've been having locally. What drives behaviour onto the high street? So is it because you get the face-to-face contact, you have places to meet and places to experience art, comfortable places, places to feel safe, places that to have experiences that you can't have online? So do cooperatives have a role in that? Absolutely. But I also think everybody has a role in that, to be quite honest. So how do we relocate health hubs onto high streets alongside libraries, onto, high streets are going to be different. They're going to be different. They're not the same thing as they're going to be before. But there is a place for them, because you do not get, there's stuff you can't do. And how do you sell cooperatives and mutuals? Well, you have the millennials are the most tuned on generation. They look for the ethics of a company in a way no other generation has. And they, my guess, are our future markets. I haven't done any work on this, but those of you that are in the sector, I'm sure have done loads of work on this. But it does mean that, they won't like the word bank, but they might really love the word co-op or something brand new in the way they would describe it. God knows, my teenagers, I do not understand the slang. But there is something there that is a whole new generation of people who are going to behave and react differently, and how much of that's driven by their ethical code.
If I can add a few points to that, and I'll pick up on your last point, Emily. When I became CEO of the co-op, we declared an ambition to increase our membership by 1 million in 3 years. We actually got to that in year 1. So now we went from a target of 5 million to 8 million. And I always say I'm looking forward to increasing that again. We've seen an almost 80% increase in Gen Z, so under 25s in our membership. And I think that it is because these ethics and the nature of the cooperative movement and their ability to engage in the democracy and have a say in what a business does when there's so little faith in business at the moment is part of that. The high streets, I don't think it's necessarily, as Emily said, just the cooperative issue. There are lots of things that need to come together. For us, business rates is a huge part of this, as is crime and shoplifting. Right, so you will have seen how we've campaigned, how the retail sector's come up. For us, it was last year, it was almost £80 million alone of theft, where the police didn't show up, where we would actually apprehend a serial offender, call the police, and then no one would show up and we'd have to leave them. So, that is legislation that almost went through. It didn't make the wash up. We should have come to you, actually, to make it happen. But it has been enacted through the King's speech. So we're hopeful about that. So there are wider factors that will enable the high street to really thrive again, but they do have to come together. The barriers to innovation, I do think at least, in some areas, innovation can be a very capital hungry process as well, and the lack of access to capital for this sector is something that is difficult, and hopefully it'll be one of the things that we can come to government with and talk about as an enabler. And the last point I just wanted to bring up is, how do you communicate the nature of it? Back to the point I made before, it is the touching and the feeling of it. In 1844, when people were having poisoned flour, when people were actually dying because their products were adulterated, it was quite clear. You paid £1, which meant that you could go to a store and you could buy unadulterated food at a decent price, right? You can grab that, you can hold it, you can feel it. And that's why I think we need to find that. With us, again, if I just give the smallest of examples, we look at member value in 3 segments. We think about the economic value, the democratic value, and the social value. And a little example that we put in was, we said, for every £5 a member spends, as long as they actually select a cause, so that's their democratic enablement, they've spent the £5, that's economic, then they go into a draw that enables them to win £500 for themselves, £5,000 for their local community cause. So that ticks the social value. The uptick that we got in terms of people selecting their cause and engaging in the democratic process has been extraordinary. So, you know, again, people have to really feel it and they have to see something substantive in order to be able to kick that off. And I really think that if we can find those first few things for them to touch and feel, then it starts the snowball effect. You did it with your £100 into people. I mean, everyone heard about that. And you were very, very clear that it was on the basis of a mutual model and that your members owned the Nationwide. So again, that's a great tangible example that brings that message across.
Almost in time, so last word.
Well, I think a number of things all work together, isn't it? The issue of crime. I remember some years ago, I spent the weekend with the police in Greenwich, and we went down to Woolwich Town Centre in the evening. And the council had invested so much money in improving the Woolwich Town Centre, but because of all the gangs hanging around there, nobody would come into the shop. There were terrible, especially dark in the evenings, and there was a running battle with the police trying to deal with these young. It was largely young men. They were just terrorising everybody else in the area, and the shops were just really struggling. You know, there's a huge issue with this about crime driving people away. You know, again, I mean, when I go home, I'll go through London Bridge, and there's this in Marks Spencer's there's been a real problem of young people going in, basically robbing the Marks and Spencer's because they're young. Security are told not to touch them because they're young people. You know, because it's just ridiculous. It's just a free for all. They literally will fill their bag up. They just walk out, and they're not because these are young kids, so you mustn't touch them, you know. And they just walk in and fill the bag. It's just ridiculous, you know. How can you operate on that basis? You know, and it's a huge problem. It's crime people. Now, again, I now live in Worthing, and in Worthing, we've got a number of secondary shopping areas that are really booming, but our main high street is struggling. I can't work out why that is. But these areas are really what's going on there. There's something not right in the main high street near the seafront because there's lots of boarded up shops there. It's struggling. I don't know what's going on there. Well, you go 3 miles up the road, and you'll see a secondary shopping area, 50, 60 shops, all open and trading. Something's not right. I don't know, maybe it's the rent or what. There's something not right there. We need to find those sort of things. But yeah, if you lose your high street, then I think it's all sorts of problems we're going to have as well. You know, we'll all end up having to get our stuff to do Amazon, which isn't what I don't want that, you know, it's just you lose everything, you know. And again with the post office as well, you know, again, I mean, it's a community asset, isn't it? We can find a model for it, you know. It's so important, isn't it? But everything we do, in terms of other financial services you get there and stuff, and actually making it part of the community, we have to find a way forward, ensure the post office remains present behind the high street. If we lose the high street, of course, then we'll all regret it, you know, in the past, you know. We've all got to try and keep it.
Wonderful. So thanks so much for your thoughtful contributions to our panel. Thanks so much for your questions and comments as an audience as well. Thanks again to Royal London and Nationwide for supporting us in this work. Do please stay in touch both on cooperatives and mutuals more generally, both with us at the Social Market Foundation, but also with Co-op, with Nationwide, with Royal London, Emily, and Lord Kennedy. But yeah, do follow our work, and my colleague has insisted that I ask you to subscribe to Wonk Week, which is our newsletter, which summarises all that's going on in the world of policy, including occasionally stuff on co-ops and mutuals. But just thanks so much to everybody. Thanks to you for listening so attentively. Enjoy the rest of your conference.